Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Here our Lux live stream for Lighting Phantom Thread. And I just wanted to introduce all of us. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mike Bauman. I was the lighting cameraman on the show. With us also is Erik Brown, first AC assistant camera extraordinaire, despite what any labelings might have said. And also joining us is from London, beautiful London, England, Gaffer extraordinaire, Mr. Jonny Franklin.
All right.
So this was a unique experience for all of us. And just to stock up, we are going to be taking a lot of questions. So great things that people are already putting them in. So we'll get to all of that good stuff. But just wanted to start with some of the inspirations for all of this. Mr. Balenciaga, this whole movie, the main part of Reynolds' character, Daniel Day-Lewis' character, is based off of Cristiano, the Balenciaga designer. And in his heyday, he had 3 fashion houses going, employing over 400 people, designing dresses. And this was at the height of couture, and very inspirational figure. Dior referred to him as the master of us all, and there's a great book that Paul gave, I think all of us as reference, called The Master of Us All. He was able to engineer. Not only could he couldn't just design, he could design, but he could also sew, and that was really his forte. Because he could sew and construct really unique dresses, and he understood stitching and all of this kind of stuff, and so much so that his dresses they actually X-ray his dresses to see the structure underneath and things like that. This is how far ahead of the game he was. And so a lot of the basis of the character in this was based off of Mr. Balenciaga, rest in peace. So Paul really was Paul Thomas Anderson, the director. Should really throw a shout out to him too, because he's probably watching this and going to be giving us a bunch of grief later. But one of the things that was really unique about this project is that we didn't, and we'll just get right to the chase on this, is we didn't have a cinematographer per se, like normal film does. We divided it up in the way of a camera operator, and what I was the lighting cameraman, which is based off of, when Paul and I were talking about it originally, it's based off of a gentleman by the name of John Alcott, who worked as a lighting cameraman with Kubrick. And one of the visual references for this movie was Barry Lyndon. And we've got a couple scene in here that is very much based off of this image. But, Paul's working style, and Erik and Jonny knows very well. And Erik and I have done, I think, you started working with him was it?
The Master.
The Master. Yeah, that's where I met you the first time. Yeah. And so we've done The Master, Phantom Thread, Inherent Vice, and is there another one in there? Yeah. But working on that, it was very much like a lot of different formats, and the Barry Lyndon part was a huge visual reference for this thing. And with Paul, it's like he is very selective on his lenses. He really understands camera and all that. And so testing is a massive part of all of his processes. And, you're testing on this show particularly, he had some really strict visual requirements. He was, even though this was a very glamorous movie with beautiful costumes that Mark Bridges designed and all that kind of stuff, he was really adamant that it really had, the image had a lot of texture to it. And so we started testing, long time ago, and a lot of the music videos that we did, we did a few high music videos and a Radiohead stuff. That was all really, part of that was also just to test elements of things for this film, whether it be lenses or it be film stocks or processes, like pushing the film and things like that, and just kind of see what works. But we're constantly testing. Testing is always a thing. And, certainly Erik, I know, what'd you say? Like when we were talking earlier, like basically we started testing the lenses on the Master or something like that.
Well, but I mean, you said it. Paul is always testing. I mean, he's always looking at something. So, and he's really smart and clever, and he's always thinking ahead. He's got projects in his head. He's got things he's got going on. So, he's just always testing. I mean, I jokingly say every day of your shoot day is also a test day. I mean, you're just always, he's always tinkering and playing. And lenses that we used on Phantom Thread um, first came to light on the Master. They were part of the lens testing for the Master, and they've, in fact, some of them we used on the Master. So Paul has a vast sort of database in his head and knowledge of all of these lenses, and we often revisit them. And I'll often get a text or an email or a phone call from him saying, "Hey, what were those VistaVision lenses we did that test for on the Master?" And we'll go back and look at stuff, and he has all of these tests on film, which he will pull out and screen at various times to refresh his memory.
True.
So it's just, I think testing is something that just never ends. It's just even when we're shooting, we seem to be testing, which is great.
Yeah. Because I know he works very closely with Dan Sasaki at Panavision, who's constantly retooling all the lenses depending on what the need is, and he doesn't ever seem to take like one just set. Like somebody might be like, "Oh, I'm just going to take the super speeds for the show," and that's great. No,
no. Paul handcrafts his own set of lenses for each show, basically. So I at some point in here, I know you have a graphic we put together, a lens list for the show that we always keep as a reference guide so that everybody has it in their pocket if we're talking about something. But it's a compilation. It's not just like a hero set of Zeiss, super speeds or Panavision Primos, or it's a mismatch of glass that all has relevance to Paul because of its look. So there's a 40 millimeter lens. It's part of a Gordon Willis's old set that actually has sort of failing coatings on the front element, so it's very, very warm. There's a 32 millimeter Cook Pancro that has a very specific look. Paul has a Pathé lens, a 50 millimeter Pathé lens that started life as a projector lens that Dan Sasaki, who's the vice president of optical engineering and all-around lens guru master at Panavision in Woodland Hills, Dan will build that lens in an anamorphic mode if Paul's shooting anamorphically, or he'll put it back spherical. And it's a very old lens. It has a lot of fall off. It's sort of center sharp, and sharp is a relative word. It's not all that sharp, but it has a very unique quality. And Paul will use it very, very selectively, but there'll just be a quick moment of a close-up or something. So a lens set is just this is to borrow a word from Jonny's side of the pond, it's a very bespoke set of lenses for each project that Paul has done, and Phantom Thread especially.
Yeah, because I like this image here. This was something I took off of the whiteboard when we were doing one of our initial tests, where Dan was just rolling in carts of different stuff, and it was like literally like a scoreboard of like, okay, let's look at this. All right, let's see. We want to some of the stuff we're going to want to push. Take a look at it. Push. Take a look at it. Pulled. Some with black pro mist. And you really just kind of start to build this thing out. And so we had done an initial round of testing at Panavision in Woodland Hills, and took a look at that, and then we were into like, oh, let's do another round. And then this time, Mark Bridges brought some fabrics and stuff to the party, some preliminary ideas and things like this. The other thing I want to say is what's interesting, especially on this film, was Paul was already playing some of the original theme music that Jonny, his composer, had already started kind of noodling around. So the music started very early on this one. And I remember in some of these tests, it was something that was just recorded off the piano. And he was just playing just so he'd get a feel for it. And we were looking at these lenses then. The reason we have like a chandelier in there and all that is just to kind of see how they flare. You generally want to see different tonal ranges for film stock. You want to see like, what's the flare quality of like, how soft is it? Because, somebody asked in a question, which is, it's a great question. Talk about the challenges of lighting this particular modern stocks with modern lights while still getting the milky, grainy vintage goodness. That's a good one. That's a very good one. Wonder if Paul has that. Yes. Anyway, that was a big conversation because a lot of the things he was like is I don't want there's a lot of gorgeous photography out there when you get into these period movies, and it looks fantastic. But he was very adamant that he didn't want it to be super glammed out and beautiful and all that kind of stuff. So it was all about trying to figure out ways to degrade the image. And you know, as we were testing again, and then these are some images from our initial first tests in London, you know, with Vicky, and just kind of, again, looking at lampshades and how, you know, curtains and different things like this, and different qualities of life, different color temperatures, and just kind of getting a real feel for kind of some of the signature stuff of what the, you know, what the film is. And we're going to post, there's a clip of some of the tests that are on YouTube. We'll post in here also. But, you know, this is all part of it. And one of the things we were looking at was using smoke. We were looking at using filtration. We were looking at using old lenses. We were making decisions if we were going to push the film. How do you get more texture into the image so it isn't, you know, a very clean image? She didn't really want that. So it was just, how do you put layers of stuff to kind of evoke the period goodness that we had? You know, and we also, on these tests, this was actually in the set, which was in central London, in the House of Woodcock, which in their breakfast area, which this is some of the notes we had from our, you know, from the original test. And it was just seeing, like, you know, looking at wall colors and things like this, and just kind of some of the set pieces. And then Mark Bridges had already had some of the costumes done. And so we could just kind of get those on film and take a look at them, and you know, make some, just again, make some decisions. Because this, like, these wall colors here were not what ended up in the movie. There's Jonny at work adjusting a light, you know. And then, you know, here's some new color samples that we're looking at. Okay. And so Mark Tilsley, the production designer, he and Paul were working very closely about all these colors and things like this. And, you know, there's a lot that goes on in these tests. And this was the house that we were shooting in, which was going to eventually become the finished house. This is really when early days with it, where we're just kind of seeing, like, okay, what's the windows like, you know, what, you know, this house was completely unfinished. They had to come in and do pretty much everything to it. But I think, yeah, you can kind of see, I think we have some behind the scenes. Could you throw up test video 2? Let's see. Yeah, so this is, if you can see, this is kind of when we were starting to do some of this preliminary testing from this stuff, and really getting a feel and kind of the voice of the movie. And then we'd go and get this developed and look at it, and then make some changes, make some adjustments. And it was just this process repeatedly to see what's working, what not. And it wasn't just lighting or camera. It was also set decoration. It was also the production design. It was costumes. It was, you know, he and Mark Bridges, I think Mark's done pretty much every one of his movies. And so he and Mark have a very unique voice in that thing. And their dialogue is really strong. So, yeah, I mean, I want to say one thing to speak to about, and I'm sure Jonny and Erik have thoughts on this too. Daniel Day-Lewis, he can make a dress. He can do it. He could measure anyone and make a dress for them. That's how he, as an actor, just, you know, we've all been fortunate enough to work with a lot of different types of actors, and he sets the bar beyond anyone. It's like Kobe. If you took Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, put them together in the acting space, that's where you were with him.
Michael, I'll just in
regards
regards to that, and with that reference that's up of him working on the dress there, he is amazing, and he, as the stories are true, he embodies every character. He was Reynolds Woodcock. I never once referred to him as Daniel or DDL or anything. It was good morning, Mr. Woodcock. Good evening, Mr. Woodcock. And Absolutely. he was the character. But that particular test, or this might not be from the test, but it looks just like when we came into this unfinished Fitzroy Square house, and we were going to do a test with Daniel and all these things, and there was a lot on my plate, so I wasn't, you know, I didn't necessarily know everything that was about to transpire. But we set up some dolly track, put 1,000 foot of film on the camera, and Daniel comes in with the form and his scissors and some material and basically just a bolt of material. And I thought we're just doing a test, lighting, camera, lenses, the normal things we test. And with Paul and the way he works, you just turn on that camera and you just shoot. And we're dollying in and out, and just Daniel's just doing his thing, and he has, tuned all of us out. And he started with a piece of fabric and a few bits, and by the time, I don't know, 5,000 feet of film later or whatever it was, he had made a dress. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. I thought, I mean, it wasn't acting and,
Yeah.
trickery. He had been, I don't know, he'd spent months or a year with the New York City Ballet and their seamstress department, costume department, learning and working. I mean, just like when he went off and made shoes. But it really was amazing. It was one of those sort of moments where you pause in your work and go, wow.
Yeah.
The
guy,
great admiration. So, and I don't know, I'm sure you'll talk about it, Mike, but just seeing the Fitzroy Square house, and just thinking of all the limitations. I mean, it was, think, I mean, the movie was almost all practical locations, and none of them easy. And the amount of limitations to shoot in this building, even though we had, bought and paid for it, what you could put outside, the hours, the neighborhood. I mean, it was so restrictive, and I know you'll get into that later.
No,
but
it's the truth. It's this place was a 5-story building with no elevator.
You have ideas based on all the tests about how you want to light something, how you want to do something, and you get in there and you realize you can't. Like light won't work. The neighborhood won't let you hang that light, or you can't put that out there. All those restrictions just immediately come back.
See, I mean, they're bringing back warm and fuzzy memories. I mean,
well, they are, but nothing
was
was easy.
The first house. I don't know if you remember the first house that we had.
Yeah, that's right. There was that other house. That one actually had a lift in it. This one didn't.
Yeah. But I went on quite early to look at that house, and I remember speaking to Mike, and I was like, "It's okay. We need to do a few bits to it and get it all working." And then a few weeks later, production called me like, "Oh yeah, we can't use that property." And then went to Fitzroy Square, and Mike was. I remember speaking to Mike, and he was like, "What was it like?" And I was like, "It's a lot worse. There's nothing."
It's the truth. It's I mean, we ended up doing because we'd go off and look at the stuff and look at the stuff we had shot in Fitzroy Square and look at textiles and stuff for curtains and hanging, and just what translates best with the because we made a decision to push the film, so we were rating like a base of 800 or 640 depending. And that just added another layer of kind of like desaturation and just another feel to, just kind of, that was the direction Paul wanted to go. And so, we do more additional testing where we're looking at more of Mark's wardrobe choices and things like that. And, meanwhile, we're all talking about how the hell are we going to shoot in this house? Because that is we'll get into that thing.
Because we had to rewire the whole house, we even had to change the schedule. So Adam had to change the schedule so that we could go out on location, just that we had enough to rewire the whole house so we could get it ready to shoot it.
Absolutely, it was crazy. And I mean, the thing too is like some of the testing didn't even happen. Like we were doing all these tests, yeah, sure, hair, makeup, wardrobe. Let's look at this. But then we'd go and scout, and you'd bring a camera too, and you'd do tests too there. So this was like when we were out in up in Staith, and it's I think where those three gentlemen are standing in the background is where they're going to put some gas pumps. And so it's just kind of like, all right, let's take a look at what this looks like. And, we'd end up, doing this kind of stuff, all over the place. It was a very small crew. It was like 4 or 5 of us just up there scouting, but then also just shooting some stuff. And the thing about with Paul, and this is what happened, I remember on Inherent Vice when we were doing the test for Inherent Vice, and we were shooting some stuff with Catherine, the lead, and it ended up in the movie. Like this is a test, and so if you're exposing film, just figure it could end up at any moment's notice.
Right. And I know, Mike, in the early stages, a lot of the stuff we shot was really beautiful. I mean, really beautiful. But Paul's reaction to it was, "It's too beautiful." In fact, one of his reactions was, "This looks like the fucking Crown. We're not doing this." you know, he
Crown is a
has,
beautifully photographed movie, to be full disclosure. Yes, great
yes,
job.
but that's the
That
point.
wasn't what he was looking for.
It's beautifully done, and he didn't want to emulate that. That was not
Yeah.
what he was after. And but there again, it's part of the testing process, and that's what you do. And you know, it wasn't right for this movie, but that's how you find out. And
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
we and hence, you know, we're looking at pushing film, pulling film, adding contrast, getting rid of contrast, all those things that then brought us to a look that was right for the film, that Paul felt was right.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it was you know, Jake, I think you played clip one. Yeah. So this was remember we're shooting out by the Cod and Lobster when that you know, of course we're gonna roll on like this crazy storm that comes in, and this is just like, all right, let's take a look at what this looks like. But you know, it's really, I think a lot of that is also just it also for him just gets him thinking about, you know, making the movie, setting the tone. People feel like they're doing stuff. It's like warm up stretching. It's like, you know,
Yes.
your warm up before your yoga class. And this was exactly that. And we did some stuff where Adam, the first AD, was walking outside of this pub, and you know, just to kind of see, okay, exposure, different looks, things like that. What do they look like? You know, and that was all part of it. You know.
But also, it's quite interesting to see how quickly the weather changed and also the color.
Absolutely.
I remember that night was when we were filming there. The sky went so purple. Like,
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
The sea was quite subdued at some point, and then it just went completely the other way.
Yeah, that the color temperature there is like what the F. I mean, it's off the charts. And you know, it was really just those couple of days of scouting and rolling a film just were very critical to us, just kind of going over what the battle plan was. You know, and then of course it all comes back to London. We process it, we screen it, we look at it. You know, this is just you know, mess around with different things. This is from when we were, you know, worked heavily with Jody. Got to do a shout out to Jody from Technicolor. She really was super helpful at times. But then sometimes dailies don't go so well. And this is a shot I took. This was horrible. This was a bad day at the office, people. This was we had done some tests. This is, I think, when he was like, we weren't getting there. The look was not headed in the right direction. So I took this image right after we got out of Technicolor and we got on the tube to head back into the city. And I just remember looking over and, you know, those are, you know, I got to hand it to you, Jonny. You have kind of the more stiff upper professional British look going. But yeah,
Paul's in full despair mode.
It was like the world's ending. It's gone to hell. And it's good. I mean, it was like, we know we don't head in that direction. So let's turn the car in this direction, you know?
Right. I think this is the good process is that, and especially with shooting on film, is that you kind of, we all built this relationship together where we were going and experiencing all of Russia together. So you're sort of you're all feeling it the same as Paul does. Like if something goes wrong, then you feel it as well because you feel blamed.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody has ownership. You're absolutely right, John.
Yes.
It's
and I think that's the beauty of shooting on film and going to the rushes afterwards. Even though there's that added pressure, is that you build this bond together. And I think by the end of it, like there was about 6 of us who would always be in that testing room that you build so close with each other.
That's right. It's funny how you start and everybody is packed. You can't even get into the room. There's so many people in there watching. And then like about 2 weeks in, okay, it's like you could practically go to sleep on all the, there's nobody there, you know, it like ends up just being a few people. You know, there is a question somebody's asking, you know, what are we, let's see, what kind of final presentation do we test for? It's all film. It is all film. In fact, this one, he will finish on film, and you know, negative cutter, the whole thing. You will end up with a print. It is all film. And yes, he does a scan. They do a DCP. That's generally how you're going to release. But this one, in fact, he was talking earlier about. Remember, he was talking about how he wants to be able to project it in 70. So he was thinking about a blow up too. And it's like, you know, so. But the entire process, every bit of it, is all thought about from doing it in film. This was Johnny's face for most of the show, FYI. But to speak to what Erik said earlier, this is kind of the list of what the lenses were at the end, right? That we went out the door.
That's a list of essentially our hero lens package that we probably did 99% of the movie with. That shows the type of lens it was, the stop, the actual serial number for it. So if you want to go to Panavision and request that serial number,
oh geez, he's
not
gonna
on
kill
another
you.
show. I know. No, actually, those lenses are all being held in the vault for PTA.
The next one.
Yeah. No, and and like I said, some of those lenses have been used on other of Paul's shoots, and so he's very aware of them. Others we test and we just like the quality or the characteristic of. It's quite a mismatch. I mean, Paul embraces film for all it has to offer, meaning its imperfections. I mean, he pushes it, he pulls it, he manipulates film because it always gives something different. I mean, the characteristics of it, hence all the testing. So it's just never straightforward. That's not what he's after. It's just like, and I don't want to say it has to be messy or gritty or ugly. It's not the case. It's just, everything evokes a feeling. And so there's a time where he just wants more contrast or less contrast or something to be flatter or something to be, there's intent behind all of it. And so each one of those lenses is on that list for a reason. It wasn't just, we should have a 35 millimeter and a 50 millimeter and an 85 millimeter. It's like, well, sure, we'll have those focal lengths for all the right reasons, but there's characteristics within that lens. There's quite a few fast lenses on there, as you touched on, Mike. All the locations, available light, the things, needing to have some fast lenses.
No, totally legit. I was going to say, what's interesting here, the thing that sticks out to me when I'm looking at this list is you have 3 different 50 millimeters. You have, 3 different 35s, and just because of the different looks of each of those. And I'd like to point out in the super speeds in the middle there is the lens that is on every one of his shows, the 50 Pathé. The damn thing is a 3.5. And I don't know who's the sick son of a bitch who puts it in the super speeds column, meaning like it as a fast stop, which it is not. It's the slowest lens of the bunch out of that whole gang. And
it's just, well, there was no special place to put it on the list. So there
no
it is.
Speed in that lens.
You might note it's highlighted for a reason.
Yes.
And it was not a fast lens, and it always kind of came up at the worst possible time.
You always had the light.
Exactly. We'd be in a low light situation, or there'd be a reason it was from a technical standpoint a difficult lens to use, and Paul would say, I need to do the shot with the 50 Pathé, and then I would watch Jonny and Mike pucker up, and the heads would come together, and Jonny would get that look that Mike's captured in those stills, and Mike, being the eternal optimist, was like, great, no problem.
Great, no problem. It was it's the thing is, you just have to, having done a few shows with Paul now, it's like, okay, just be prepared for the Pathé. And there was times where we'd be like, look, if we were going to use this approach on a certain set or something, just make sure you're not going to want to use the Pathé here, because if we're going to shoot in this place with no light, we got to be wide open. And the thing is, understand is like his process is not one of being he's not a tyrant or anything like that. I mean, no. I think Colin Anderson said it to me once early in the process. He said Paul's fingerprints are on every frame of a film, and I think that's very true. And it's like he's definitely about like, look, we're gonna like our normal work day would be like, he would take time with the actors, and we'd come in, we'd look at the rehearsal, he'd talk about what some of his shots were, but then he and Colin would engage in conversation about like, hey, I'm thinking of 40 millimeter over here, and Colin would be like, okay, cool. And then sometimes Colin would be like, you know what, maybe just saying, do you want to see this? Because then maybe we should go to the 35. Oh, okay, that's good. It's a very collaborative feeling.
Very.
And it's the same with the lighting. It was like, we would talk about lighting, and then and it was always open to all of our collective opinions. Once we got into a groove for all of us, it was like, so it was a very collaborative experience, and he just ixnays anything he doesn't like.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Mike, you with saying that Paul's fingerprints, I mean, Colin's quote, but it's absolutely right. Paul's fingerprints are on every frame. And I think that's an important part of why I know a lot of people say, why no DP? And having had conversations with Paul about that, it's something that Paul has thought about doing for a long, long time, actually, because he is so involved, and he thought, it might be interesting to try this. Maybe it's one less, round of communication that if I have all this in my head and I want to do it. And it wasn't to cut anybody out of the loop, or it wasn't anything like that. It was just a part of his creative process. And he felt like he had this small team of people he could trust that would tell him if he's about to go off the deep end. And it was something he's wanted to try for a long, long time. And this was probably the first project that sort of lent itself to that. And you're right. Paul is the ultimate. He's at the top, and it's his word. So he was very collaborative, and if he liked what you had to say, it was incorporated, and if he didn't, he was quick to say no, and always a reason. Anytime I had a conversation with him or suggested something that he didn't want to do, or there was always a legitimate reason, and it was great. And I think that's an important part of his process. And I will say, just one little side note, that at one point, relatively early on in our shooting, maybe 2 weeks into it or something, one of those moments of despair, Paul candidly said to me, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't.
I remember that.
I remember he said, and his reasoning was that he had too much on his plate, and it was detracting from valuable time he wanted to spend with his actors, and that he was maybe being pulled in too many directions, and something would suffer as a result of that. That was his fear. Very legitimate. I thought, one, very legitimate rationale, and two, it was incredible that he felt comfortable, saying that to us. And it was a short-lived moment. We all like, hey, we can do this. Come on. But it was an interesting moment.
It was because I think it was also that we went in, we started the shooting order. I mean, we went out of the gate, and we started up in Staithe, which is up in like northern England.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't easy.
It wasn't
an easy way to start.
Not an easy way to start. It would have been, I mean, and speaking to what Erik said, is that we started kind of this process of like, we did a Radiohead video for Daydreaming, and that was kind of the first time we tried to do something where there really wasn't a traditional cinematographer, and kind of work in this lighting cameraman, camera operator fashion. And it worked pretty well. And at the end of the video, he's like, what do you think? You think we could do a movie this way? And I was like, well, I think if we had enough prep, we probably could. And I didn't know anything really about the film at that time. And that's kind of how it evolved. But we start the movie working up here, which probably, in hindsight, given the level of stress and just of what Erik just said, maybe it wasn't the best decision, But it is a quaint little part, Robin's Hood Bay and all this kind of stuff up there.
Beautiful location.
Gorgeous. Yeah, this is one of the opening shots of the film, and the Victoria Hotel is where we actually shot on the in the interior, for where he meets her for the first time. But I mean, look, this is me just taking photos a few minutes from each other, and the sun is out, and then the sun is in, and then it drops 3 more stops, and it's like, this is I guess this is why they got a well-stocked bar at most of the BSC or the ASC or wherever you're at when you go to the gatherings. There's alcohol plays a part, because this one is this location was a tricky one, and in more ways than one. And it's a simple scene. It's where he meets her for the first time, and I know Paul had said that Daniel, after he met Vicky in rehearsals, was like, I don't want to see her again until we meet for that first moment. And this was literally what it was. The shot is him actually seeing her for the first time when he sees her. But this was like, it's a couple hard days at the office here on this one, if I remember, Jonny.
Brutally difficult. I remember doing things more than once at this location.
I'm going to lay it right now. Okay. Yes. I think might have been a little too much going on everybody's plate at the time, and I might have screwed up the exposure a little too much, which of course was an interesting interpretation, but not the one he was looking for, which gave him an excuse to reshoot it anyway, which is, and that's the thing is like additional photography reshoots, that is not a dirty word.
No.
And, that's just part of the process. And sometimes you find performances and things like that. So,
and two notes on that. One you talk about that process of sometimes accidents can be a good thing, and sometimes we're not all on the same page, no matter how well we communicate with one another. And case in point, just you talked about dailies, and I remember vividly when, not this location, but the atelier, where the dressmaking is made at his home. And I'll just digress for just a moment, because then that photo that Jake just put up is the second half of the story. But we shot the first scenes in the atelier after much discussion about how to light it, and you gentlemen went to great trouble to do, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We shot the scene. We went to dailies. Paul was running late or had a meeting, and said to us, "You guys screen it. I'll screen it later." So we did, and it was getting late, so we didn't wait for Paul. We went to bed, and Colin Anderson, camera operator, and I walked out of dailies that night and looked at each other and went, "That looked great. Wow, that stuff looks great." And the next morning, right out of the gate, Paul said, you could tell he wasn't in a great mood that morning, and it immediately came up. He hated it. He hated the way it looked. He didn't like it, and for a bunch of reasons. And it was just one of those things where he realized, okay, there was nothing photographically, there was nothing wrong with it. It was beautiful, but it wasn't right for what he wanted in that moment the story was going to tell. The other, you mentioned, Mike, sometimes these things, accidents, a happy accident, just unrelated to lighting. In this scene where we meet Vicky's character Alma for the first time, and the flirting is going on with Reynolds Woodcock, there's a moment when she trips then serves him the food, and if you look, she's very red, she's very flushed, and that wasn't a lighting trick. That was just real life intervening in a moment where she actually tripped, and she was terribly embarrassed because we were rolling on her, and she completely blushed, and it was so perfect for her character in that moment. It's in the movie.
So, didn't she tripped on Jeff Conkling's dance floor?
Yes. She tripped on the dance floor that was laid down, because we were trying to do again, this was a test that we did previously on a Heim video where we thought we could roll around on the floor with a Libra head. And so that was the first attempt. That was the idea. Okay, cool. We did it at that job. Let's see if this works here. And didn't work as well. So Kunkel had to lay down dolly track, Jeff Kunkel, who was the dolly grip, and she tripped on it, and boom, it's in the movie. There you go.
It's in the movie. And also on a technical note, one of the very, very few times in the movie we actually used a zoom lens was for some of this. Now, I would have to go back and look at camera reports and notes to see whether any of the shots that were shot with the zoom lens actually made it in, because we did reshoot a lot of that material. But that was one of the rare moments, because we were on a Libra head on a dolly. We were trying to not do a bunch of lens changes and have some flexibility. But there's virtually no material in the movie that was shot on a zoom. I mean, it's just a couple of shots, if that.
Hey, Jake, could you play clip 3? So, yeah, it's some footage of when we were doing this and just kind of rolling around on this floor, which is it's definitely period floor.
Yes.
And trying to see if what would work, and it's worked okay, I guess. But hey, it put it in the movie.
And a shout out there, you mentioned Jeff Kunkel, who's a key grip, dolly grip, wears many hats. Jeff has been with Paul longer than any of us. Jeff goes back to Magnolia, or maybe even before. So he's definitely one of the dirty dozen.
Yeah.
There's Jeff.
It was great meeting Jeff, because obviously working in the UK, our system's completely different to your guys.
Yes, exactly.
Jeff is in charge of a lot of the flagging and blacking out and diffusion of lights. And then we tried to integrate it into our system. He was met with faces from our electrical department.
But I will hand it to you guys because I remember this not only so this is like one of our first days of shooting, and we were using we had a lot of stuff to hang. There was a lot going on in this set, and then outside the windows is like the exposure is constantly changing. Like we were gonna have, I think we had ND cut, and then we just gave up on it because it was going to take literally in the time it would take to pull the ND off, the exposure would change again. So it was just like screw the exposure. As far as and with ND, let's just try and balance as much as we could off of the lens. And so then we'd end up with like going to what you said, Erik, about happy accidents. We ended up with this, which is like it's in the movie. It's when he's contemplating if he should ask her for dinner, but the sun came out of nowhere, fantastic, and here it is, and and so he used that shot, and
right. But I know I did see that someone was writing in one of the questions about the challenges of working with the light there, which I'll let you and Jonny go into in further detail at the appropriate time. But happy accidents are brilliant, but it was unbelievably frustratingly, maddeningly difficult to shoot a scene, an actual dialogue scene between these characters over the span of an entire afternoon when it was constantly changing. I mean, 3 to 5 stop exposure change out the windows. Yeah. And, and we're a small crew. We're not a big crew. So even managing that is limited to begin with. And, yes, you get the happy accident, but boy, there's a reason, Mike, you don't have any hair left on your head because you just, you're trying to do this and make it match because you don't know what take is going to be in the movie. And it was really difficult for all of you. I mean, without a doubt.
A special shout out also to Dylan Tishner, the editor, for whatever influence he had on this space was very appreciated. Because like outside that window, that exposure out the window, I mean, that's not, we didn't have an ND, we didn't have it. It was just, like you're adjusting every other level to match with that exposure and try and keep that. And we had to do that a lot in the House of Woodcock too, and all this, which, but yeah, I mean, basically we had hung light mats and light tile over the windows just to push soft ambience in. And, throughout.
This is also a location because obviously we tested the ND on the windows. I think you can see in that picture there that on the right there's ND and on the middle.
Oh, yeah. Yes, right.
I think it was just that it obviously worked as a premise, but in terms of speed of shooting, it slowed us down so much because you have to screw them into the window frames and then unscrew them.
It was windy too. I remember it being super windy, like those guys are out there trying to hold frames, and it was just like, forget it, So we were using a lot of, our console was Luminaire on the iPad, and just Jonny would be adjusting exposures, I'd be adjusting exposures. It was just trying to, I was using I was taking a lot of digital stills. It took over 11,000 on the movie, so it's like, that was a lot of how we were judging exposure because it just had to go so quick once we got some base settings.
How did your job change, Mike? Do you feel from obviously gaffing in the States to then taking on a huge role as a lighting cameraman?
It was definitely evolving. Especially what's interesting is the prep period because normally as a gaffer, our prep is pretty minimal, and by that point a lot of decisions have been made and you're just kind of like reacting. It's more reactionary. We started shooting this in January of 2017, and we were messing around with this thing in testing back in the States, I think, August or so, and we had done that Radiohead video in April of that year of 2016. So I was kind of getting the idea of just kind of like, it's like how to work with, because it's so specific with Paul, how to work with him and kind of in this quasi DP role, I guess I'd say, because, Mark, the production designer, and I would go out and talk about different stuff. And he would just be talking to me like, the same, like he would talk to any cinematographer and, well, do you think we should do this? What do you think about this? And, it was a bit of trial by fire at times, I would say, and also I didn't know your recommendation. And so it was like, we had to develop our working relationship, and it was this, and then, it was,
well, I remember I came out obviously to LA, I was on holiday and I came out to meet you.
Right.
Well, first I came out to just, I was on holiday and then went to meet Colin, and he was testing for another film. And he's like, oh, we're going to go do these tests, you should come along. And that was when I first met you. And just like, it was a completely, obviously the American system is completely different to us.
Yeah, I was going to say what was interesting on the Jeff Kunkel part, which was, because Jeff obviously is a key grip, and he's been a grip for, I don't know, probably close to 40 years, and very, very skilled at cutting light and things like that. And so for him, he was like, and he's very particular about like, this is how you set a flag and all this kind of stuff. And he's also what's great about him is he can be a little cantankerous at times, especially when there's not a lot of sleep. And so those elements combined offer many opportunities for fun and excitement. And so Jonny, I remember you guys at first there was obviously some tension because he was like, you got to set the flag this way and all this kind of stuff. But then I think at some point you guys are like, okay, we're going to screw with him. And then you started getting him to set the flag. So here's Kunkel running around it was like a cartoon, like trying to set this flag. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Bam, 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 bam. And then finally Paul's like, where's Kunkel? I need him on the dolly. And you guys have got him like running his ass off. It was great. I mean, I can only imagine what he'd be saying now if he was part of this, but yeah.
But he couldn't join us, so he can't defend himself. So
yes, he can't defend himself. You're not here.
Exactly. No, and I think the crew wise, it really was a fabulous group. And, I had the luxury, in fact, he may be watching this afternoon, my camera assistant, Danny Lilly, who is London based, and I had the pleasure of doing a show with prior. So we had history together. Yeah. So it was just an absolute dream for me. I mean, I couldn't have been in better hands. And it's a little easier with camera in terms of camera works in fairly similar ways around the world. There's subtle differences, but not as big as the difference between grip and electric between the UK and the American system. So that was a little easier, but I couldn't have been in better hands. So, and that made a big difference because it's always complicated with Paul, and I prefer this is the photo shows, you always want to be right there. You don't want to be off dealing with something equipment wise or gear wise or everything, because as soon as you leave Paul's side, there's an issue of some sort. So I was, shout out to, to all the UK team, because it really did come together. And I remember seeing these photos and remembering those first couple days. I just remember a few of my UK brethren looking at me like, what have you done to me? What are we, what road are we going down?
Let's just talk about day one. And, also, we're in the UK system. The UK system generally works like 10-hour day, a continuous 10 is what they call it, or you work at 12 with a lunch. And so I think the plan was continuous 10 or 12. I can't remember. I want to say day one, we went like 18 hours.
Right.
I just remember Steve Young, the best boy, Youngie being like, oh my God. First of all, I could barely understand what he was saying because he has a very strong accent. But I could tell from the body language he was pissed. And, so already it's like all these people are like, this is how you people make movies. You guys are crazy. And so we came out of the gate swinging the bat.
But we found our sea legs. I mean,
yeah,
I don't think Paul wears a watch, because Paul's a different breed. I mean, he's a filmmaker. We're not cranking out material for a studio or for a series on Netflix or something. I mean, when Paul does a project, it's they don't happen often. They're very unique, and so you're all in. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like doing it, because it is, you are going down a really unique path that you just almost never get to do anymore. Yeah. So and it's just different. But if you haven't done that before, you haven't worked with someone like Paul, then that day one is an eye opener. But I do feel, and Jonny, you can attest to this because this is a team well and work with. I do feel like eventually everybody was on board with what it took. I mean,
and it's quite funny what you said, because Colin, I worked with Colin before on a show called The Mummy, and
right.
he actually, Colin actually told me before I got involved. He's like, just so you know, like Paul's films are quite draining, like they take a lot out of you, but ultimately you feel like as though you've done something, like you've got something.
Exactly.
And then it was like the first few days, it's like when it just, that realization just hit in that we were just like, we were all in it. Like,
Yeah.
doing long hours and just like, we wouldn't stop until we had it. And it was just, everyone had to be on board of that. And I think we all adapted quite quickly to that situation.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I was just looking at this next image, which is, this is an interesting thing, because this is like, we needed a shot of him picking her up. Okay. First day, we had this grand plan of like, okay, we're going to have this, we'll have a cherry picker, a condor sitting in the parking lot with a light on it. Let's take it up in the air. We'll get a little something going. And, we put some brighter bulbs and those practicals back there, and let's try and shoot it at the right time so we get a nice exposure in the sky. Well, look, the first rule of filmmaking is, and if anything can go wrong, it will. And, sure enough, the condor like barely got off the ground. It was like, that's as high as it could go. There was much curtain. There was a lot going on over there, but it was like, all right. And I remember Jonny, you and me were like, all right, well, let's just take a par can over there. And we were just coming up with like, what do we got that we can do something? And it worked out. I mean, in a weird way, it was more about shutting stuff off and, getting that sky in the right spot, with the wet down on the street, which I think was there naturally. We got nice reflections of the sky and the puddles and stuff. And it really that's where it came from. But that shot, I mean, I think that whole scene we shot in like, I don't know, it was definitely under 2 hours. It was like, maybe we got it in a half hour because it was just way at the end of the day, just snuck that one in there. And yeah.
And Mike, just to elaborate, that shot reminds me, that ties in a couple of things you've already touched on, which was someone had asked a question about, finishing, whether you're finishing, digitally, DCP, film, whatever. And you say, it's all film all the time with Paul. And also Jeff Kunkel and the way he can cut and shape light from a grip standpoint. That was a classic example because you were struggling to control spill because you couldn't light it the way we wanted to light it with the Condor. You were working on the fly, and it suddenly became more, because you couldn't just say, hey, let that go. We're going to fix that when we do the digital, we'll tone that down. We'll take that kick off the stones, the wet stones.
Not happening.
It not happening. It had, you had to do it right while you shot it, because there was you were limited as to what you could fix down the line, because it's a photochemical process. And there were just that photo reminds me, because I remember we were struggling with trying to make the pool of light look correct, like it was street light motivated, because it just, we were struggling. And it just, case in point, why it was so important to have someone like Jeff Kunkel and the grip team he put together, and the electrics who worked, all of that, became very important because we were shooting on film, finishing on film.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we had like 500 watt or 1,000 watt globes in those street lights or something, Jonny. I know we stepped those things way up so we could just kind of try and manage the exposure a bit better. It was this was a doozy. This is a hell of a way to end the first day.
We had electricians, because we didn't have time to put a whole dimming rack in. We had electricians on every lamp. That's right. Dim it down, go. Yeah.
And Mike, you said the end of the first day, and was that the same first day that we started at like 3 a.m. or whatever because of our massive long dolly shot, or was that a different day?
That's a different day. That was it. Yes.
Okay, because I was thinking that was a really long day if we started with the Don Dolly shot and finished with that.
So this was I think this was day 2 or 3, because they needed some time to dig out the hill to put the dolly track down.
Right, because guess what? It had been raining. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So it was a little wet. So
this is a scene where they're walking along in the morning, and she says to him, "Whatever you do, do it carefully," And I don't know. We actually got some video. Hey, Jake, you want to play clip 4? This is 200 feet of dolly track, and actually, I don't know if it's in this video, but there's one point Colin comments. He's just like, it might be another video. He's like, 200 feet. Well, he seemed a little disappointed. He's like, because normally with Paul, it's like
400 feet.
Like, remember that we did that one shot on the Master with the boat where Joaquin's walking. It's like,
Joaquin's approach to the boat. That was
700 feet of dolly track or something crazy.
Right.
Yeah. So, this, this had to be dug out the day before because just to make it where they wanted it, and so the grip crew had spent the day before laying in all this track, getting it all leveled, and we had to come out here at like I don't know what time it was, like 3 a.m, or we left the hotel at 3 a.m. to be out here so we could get it right when the sun started coming up, and the thing that is really was a challenge was the fact that hey Jake, are you back on the image? Maybe I'm crazy. Looks like it's there we go. Yes. The thing that was a challenge is because we didn't know what kind of a sunrise was going to happen, or if there was going to be a sunrise, or we were just going to be fogged in. So we didn't have any lights or anything like this. And I remember when we scouted it, Jonny, it was like we're standing out there. Literally, it was just blistering cold, and like the wind is blowing, and this is just like I think that was when everyone's realizing what kind of a movie we're really making. But it's crazy because the sun started coming up, and I was looking at it, I was like, oh man, people are gonna think we did this on a green screen or something. It was just like everything was falling into place. But it was, that's the kind of thing that's like, okay, we shoot this for a couple hours, and then we went back inside. I think we went back inside to the diner or the restaurant to do some more stuff there. And so it was, week one, very eventful. There's another section of the film where he goes out to the country and to his country house, which is, where was that again?
The Yorkshires, Alpin Manor.
Alpin Manor, yeah. The Cotswolds.
Yeah. Oh, the Cotswolds, yes, that's right. Cotswolds.
That's right. And there's a shot in the film where the camera's rigged behind. This is what it looked like. That is Jeff Kunkel, who worked
with built that rig.
Yeah, Gary. I can't remember. I'm totally blanking on Gary's last name. He's like this legendary grip in England. Really cool guy. But so Jeff and Gary had this. This thing was bouncing around, but it was actually like loosen the bolts. It looked really cool. And because of course this is like some country road. And we shot this at like dawn also, and just kind of, and then second unit, there was another that I think it's Carlos, right? The other operator.
Yeah, de Carnival, yes.
Yeah, he picked off a couple of shots of the car driving and stuff later. But yeah, this is the kind of like outs, and Paul was on this shot for a while. He had this one mapped out in his head like during the prep.
Right.
And
but also a situation where Paul had no interest in doing this with his stabilized head. I mean, he wanted a hard mount. He wanted it mounting with the car. It was just part of the feel that he wanted. There was intent behind doing it this way.
Absolutely. I was going to say there's a question. Well, actually, Rob Anthony's question about using older light fixtures, like old hot lights. Ooh, that's a good one. I want to come back to that one because that was a.
We put redheads on. No, it was blondes, wasn't it? We put blondes on this car.
Oh, his headlights.
And then every time it would be broken.
Oh, right. That were pointed off to light up the road.
I totally do not have any images from that, but there's a scene after they go to the dinner for the first time and they're driving to dinner. Night scene, country road. And it was like, okay, normally when you're like that, we'd be like, okay, we need lifts everywhere and lights everywhere. And Paul's like, nah, let's just strap a light to the back of this thing and blast away. And I'm like, dude, really? But it's in there, and it's kind of fun. It's different, and it's like.
I remember the car would come back after a take, and like the lights were broken, so then we'd have to swap the lights out, get more lights, and of course we were in the Cotswolds. We had like limited resources. So, like every time the lights come back broken, so then we'd have to pull them off and try to fix them before the car came back again, knowing that the next lights would be broken. Yeah, it was just give me every spare you got. That's right. That was funny. Yeah, but it was really it was definitely an unusual way to light a night interior / exterior of a car, because we had a little bit of LED inside the car for their faces, and then this light blasting in the back of it, and then unusual approach inside. Go ahead.
I was just saying it was a bit like the driving work in A Clockwork Orange or something. It's like this bizarre throwback. So
So one of the first scenes we shot when we were in Cotswolds was the scene where the two of them are sitting, and she's basically talking to him and just kind of trying to figure out who this character is. Um, this this scene was a full shift. You know, Paul is really referencing the Hitchcock movie Rebecca on this, and he's got, he was really wanting a strong backlight, really more of a really classic Hollywood type of thing. And it kind of evolved into motivating the light off the fireplace a bit more, which was this, again, very fun and exciting way of hanging a bunch of bulbs and with strips of gel. And I was running a flicker gag on the iPad, which is, okay, I've learned a lot since then. I'll just say that, And so, it's the two of them. It's the two of them sitting there and talking, and it's a lot of dialogue. In fact, there's more to it that didn't end up making in the movie. But yes, I think, and we've been working a lot of hours already, so it was like, some of us got a little sleepy.
Because obviously there's meant to be a fire going on, and I knew you were in control of it on the iPad. And then I just watched the take, and then it was just quite still. And I was like, "What's going on?" And then I looked over to you, and you were just falling asleep.
Right. It's true. It is true. And
but you had company. You weren't the only one, Michael.
I did. Yes, I know. That was Colin. Colin fell asleep on the eyepiece. What can you say?
Well, it was a very long scene in a very warm room. It was very comforting, and I know, Mike, that particular Alpin manor, however many hundreds and hundreds of years old it was reminiscent of many places like that in the UK, where some very low ceilings, some very difficult sets to try to put any lights. I mean, just to other than practicals. There's just, I know we just battled, you could hardly shoot a scene with people standing without seeing the ceiling. I mean, so if you're trying to, I just remember you were just constantly like, how are we going to light this? There's just nowhere to put it.
Well, and the thing is it speaks to what the question earlier, which Rob Anthony asked, which is, just the consideration of using older lights. Like Paul is all about like, use as much of, the amount of grief that was being handed out during the test, because it was like, we were trying LEDs, and the reason there's various advantages to LEDs, heat, all this kind of stuff. But the other thing is like, in this environment, we're also trying to create soft light. And, in these practical environments, like what you said, if you're going to sit back there on a wide lens, you've only got, I'm like, yeah, man, we can totally light this with incandescent, but we're going to be 8 feet here. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, we did that test.
That's right.
Where we showed Paul what it would be like to light with the lights that he wanted. And
to get the same quality, yes.
It was a complete mess inside the house. And like we had diffusions and flags, and it was crazy. And then we just basically turned around and was like, if this is what you want, this is how it's going to be almost every look.
That's right. That's right.
And Michael, I know related to this, like someone I think did write in asking about, exposure and exposure levels and stuff. And I know that typically in a scene like this, an interior scene, you did light pretty consistently. Like if we found that what was workable was a T25, say, you were pretty consistent. If we turned around, looked at the other actor or something, I know we would often have conversations about, shots Paul had intended and what do we need if we were trying to hold a certain amount of focus, or something. But I think by and large, we weren't just all over the map. Like, suddenly we're wide open, suddenly we're, 2 stops different or something. That there was a lot of consistency, just for visual consistency with a lot of these interiors, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, it is definitely like, I think we kind of, thing is, since we were rating it at 800 or 640, we were in that zone depending. It was like, it was very equivalent to like, because people are asking about digital, and, we were able to take advantage of we were able to definitely exploit the advantages of LED and some of these newer technologies to make adjustments very quickly, because, like were saying in the restaurant, we couldn't control the windows. We had to wait. You're not going to set up ladders and put scrims and stuff. It was like dim it down quick, take it up quick. So those are really critical things. We tried to stay in the 2.5, 2.8 range. And then if we knew we were going to be had to be at a 4, some stuff we base at a 4 because if you wanted to use the path A, things like that. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And some of the lenses we had, because it was by and large all older vintage glass, some of the lenses were quite fast, but they didn't necessarily look that great wide open. I mean, if you had a 1.4 lens but could shoot it at a T2, it really sort of came to life in a good way. And we did have some issues where we did, we'd shoot that T1.1 50 millimeter. A couple times we just had to shoot it wide open, and it just doesn't quite hold up. But that was the beauty, was being able to take old glass that was fast, and then know that if you could at least get to, a 1.8 in some cases, it just that half stop to 1 stop difference of being off of wide open made all the difference. And then that lens just looked great, and it had that lovely vintage look to it. So there was a bit of a method to the madness in that regard.
Yeah, we also used on this, especially in the House of Woodcock and things, we used a lot of smoke as a base, and not like fog the hell out of the place. Although there are some parts that we'll talk about later when that kind of got a little heavy, but it was just to get some texture. It's all about creating texture. Right. And we were messing around with low con filters.
I was going to say, we did use the low con filters quite a bit, especially at Fitzroy Square in the main house.
Yeah.
Where we had a lot more of the bigger windows mixing the daylight.
Yeah. Yeah. And, but again, since these are all practical locations, it was not easy to maintain smoke. Like when you're on a stage.
No. Super difficult.
And, it wants to run a long take. And, so if you're running a 3-4 minute take, you're going to see changes in smoke density, no doubt about it. This was in a barn next to the house we were shooting in that Mark created as an atelier, a country atelier, where he would create dresses and things like that. And what was interesting is because this is a photo from the Scout. So what they'd done, which was clever, this is the barn itself. He built a floor about 8 feet off the ground, 10 feet off the ground there. And so you could take advantage of the rafters and the beams. So you can see here, this is basically the ceiling, that arch, all that architectural stuff he could take advantage of. He just needed to bring the floor up. So we were really working on this whole set about, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 feet off the ground. And we had a lot of work here. We had started with an original idea of how to light this. It was more of a fluorescent-y type of feel. We shot for that a bit. They weren't on board with it, and it wasn't just the lighting. It was also just color tones, the look, some of the wardrobe choices, all sorts of stuff. And so we ended up
even performance. I mean, it wasn't just technical. It was across the board. It wasn't what Paul wanted the first time around.
And so we ended up going back and redoing, changing a lot of it, and then kind of having another go at it, another bite at the apple, so to speak. But we did a lot of this with light mats and things like that, just because they were lightweight. And again, all of this stuff is very much practical locations. And Mark Tilsley had found this snooker light. I don't know where the hell he found it. That he basically put over the top of the table, and which worked as a source for the table. And we kind of motivated off of that and some of the other practicals that were hanging in there.
But this wasn't our first incarnation, was it?
No.
Before that snooker light, we had the fluorescence.
Oh, it was pure
and Johnny, the fluorescence then became more of the China hats for the second round, right?
Yeah.
The snooker light over the table replaced one of the big fluorescent things, and then the other fluorescence became China hats.
Yeah.
And the other thing he did, it was a good idea. It was a very good idea, and you can kind of see it a bit in this next still, because whoops, not that one. This one here. One of the things was we didn't really have the ability to paint in between the beams, the ceiling, it was a white ceiling, and we weren't able to paint that down. So Paul had he was like, what was that? We took that scrim and put it in there. And you can kind of see on the far right, you can kind of see where there's scrim and where there's not scrim. And so there's scrim that's cut, just to take the intensity of the wall down. And it photographically, with everything that we were doing, it looked great. It totally worked. And it was a way that we didn't have to try and paint that down. And, just the scrim, we threw the scrim on, and it really worked out well as far as just building more contrast so we could take the walls down more. Because even though we were using all this stuff to control the light, it was still hard given how the performance was going, just to always get the light off the walls and stuff like that.
It was quite funny. In these locations like the atelier, when there's just so many different bits of fabric, and we just kept stealing them to hang in front of our lights because they look so good. So every so often, like we'd find this amazing net that was on set, and we just start using it in front of our lights.
That's right. You're right. Yes, it'd be like, oh, what's this? Hey, what do you got back there? And it was like, oh, I got this stuff. Great, grab it. One of the sparks would grab it, and we'd bring it in. And, okay, let's try that. Yeah, it was there was a lot of material around there just to start messing around with. Let's see this bounce.
And Mike, Jonny, would you say that your approach to like this, the atelier, but many places, was to light the space as opposed to lighting actors? Because Paul's process, I mean, we rarely do a rehearsal like any conventional rehearsal, especially when he works with Daniel Day-Lewis, because there's a lot of free reign for Daniel. It just seemed like there were a lot of times where you didn't know exactly where somebody was going to stand or what they were going to do. So, it just seemed like more times than not, you would light a space, we would shoot, and then sometimes we'd get the time or the ability to sort of refine it when we moved in for some coverage. But it just seemed like a lot of times we weren't really sure what was going to happen.
I think that's the beauty as well of using the Luminaire app, is that watching the rehearsals, obviously knowing that we could never figure out, we didn't actually want to restrict the actors to go into one spot, is that we would just rig lamps in the hope that they'd be in the right place, and then Mike would have the iPad, and then depending on where the actors would stand, would either turn the lights on or off. And as you say, it's like after the first take, we'd then maybe figure out where they're going to head, so we'd maybe just add another light.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that was definitely part of it, of like, okay, let's hide this, let's put something there. And, just in case that plays over, or, bring it up so you have a little bit of an eye light. And then you're also building cues in that too, because, the camera's going to swing around here. Oh, great. Well, let's fade this out and bring this up. And it became a really, having the ability to control everything remotely became critical, because once they're in the zone, I mean, really, these are really tight spaces. There was no room to be hanging out up there.
No.
And
Paul did not like changes. When we wanted to go in and change the light, he did not like it.
Not popular option.
But he because of his good eye, and because he is serving as a director DP as well, he often would see what Jonny, you and Mike would see about the same time. And so it wasn't always a fight or a struggle. And I know that there were times where Jonny, you or Mike could both whisper in his ear after take, hey, I think that's a little too dark, or there's a problem or something. And he was usually pretty good about saying, yeah, we need to fix that, or let's take a minute. But you're right. Once his actors were in that mode, he does not want to be bothered with technical things. It's like, it's all about performance when it's go time.
Yeah. And the thing is with Daniel, it's really critical that, like, I remember Mark Tisley, they did a pre-production meeting in the space, not here, but in the kitchen. And he's got to have props, and everybody had to have reasons behind everything on that table. This isn't like you're just, I'm just going to put out some stuff here and make this fair. He's going to ask you, hey, so what's the story on the spoon? What's the story on this? What's the story on that? And there has to be narrative, because that's all part of how he's building his character. And he's definitely like, the bar is set so high, it just pushes all of us to just really bring better game. It's really it's definitely.
Right. I remember Daniel Day-Lewis, when he would when he would come into that atelier and that table was laid out with whatever scissors and thread and needle and various things, he would always set it up his way. I mean, he would move things like you're right. There was a reason in his mind behind everything that was on there and why it was in that position. And he would ask for certain things like, hey, what happened to that? Something I didn't, prop you didn't even know existed. So yeah, no, it is a very high level of, it's not just an actor showing up on a set, just hitting their marks. It's way beyond that.
Yeah, that definitely. We were back down. This is a shot from the end of the movie where we were again working down in the our motivated fireplace light, and sometimes we would use real flame and have effects put a flame bar in there, and sometimes we would also augment with different warm sources. This is some of the final frames of the film. But at the end of the movie, that's a bling, what we call a bling light, and it's a great little thing that's evolved over time. I got turned on to it from Harris Savitas, who I think got it from Chris Menges. Everybody steals from everybody. But it's a collection of low wattage, like 10 watt or 5 watt bulbs just mashed together, and you get this gorgeous light. Really beautiful, and it's warm as hell. It's like 2300 Kelvin, but it's good stuff. And so, this shot, this scene's at the end, where she's just kind of at the fire. This is some frame grabs from it. And he's talking about how he's getting hungry. And, just again, very simple. And we would often take time to just kind of motivate with augmenting with LED, on top of practical lights and shoving stuff in there that we could. Jonny, can you explain this? What the hell is this thing? I remember us using this. This is like maybe one of our attempts at some sort of firelight or something. It's silver tip bulbs.
I do remember. Wasn't it one of Paul's idea to wrap silver foil?
Thank you. That's his idea. Great. Now we know. Okay. There you go, people.
I'm sure we made it's bulbs again, but we wrapped like silver foil around it to make some strange beauty light, but it didn't work. So remember, there was a few times as well where we tried bouncing into silver umbrellas to create like a hard / soft light. But
we did that in the tests, and it just wasn't.
They just didn't work.
Yeah, it wasn't the right feel. Again, here's the scene where she's talking to the doctor at the firelight. This is at the beginning throughout different parts of the movie. And this, we took flame bars and just had silver card that was far enough it wouldn't catch on fire, just to kind of reflect it back. And that was pretty much it, just with that and some silver bounces. And then when we would see the fire, we'd lose the fire and either bring in a bling or something else just to kind of wrap it around on her. Here's a frame grab from it. But there's the kitchen, which is where some of the interesting scenes happen, at the end. And this was, again, we're working a lot with practicals, a lot with practical locations. Colin there, he's crammed in the corner. It's just fitting everything wherever you could. There was this practical that was over the table, and this thing was the bane of everyone's existence because it was, like a wiring nightmare and just some old piece of shit that the cables were super old, and we're trying to like zip tie more bulbs in there and get more light out of it. And it was just a friggin' nightmare. But of course it ended up being one of the main things for the scene.
And it was also, I don't know if you remember, but it was weighted. So like if you put a bit of weight on one end, it would pull up the other one. So like we had to then perfectly balance every lamp. And it was a pain.
It was.
I remember that scene. We had dados everywhere.
Yes,
and
like I had an image
in that light.
Yeah, we had stuff bouncing into the tables, little dados, and it was like, that was a challenge. And then when she's over at the thing, and one of the things that I brought over from the States was I have these old Kinoflow bar flies, which we had retrofitted and pulled out the fluorescent and just use the housing and put LED in there. And so, because what they're really good is they're very compact and they have great crates, so you have really good control. And so we could hide those things all over the place, and but then have bicolor LED in there to to light them with, but not have spill all over the walls, because it was very difficult to set flags anywhere or anything like that. And so like all of this kind of stuff was low glows and bouncing dados into different materials and stuff like that. It was yeah.
There was a question mark about the bling light and having multiple channels, but the bling light, that was is it 4 channels, the bling light?
I think it was one. I think it was 2 channels, maybe. I think it had 3 switches. Actually, I think it was 1 channel, and we had.
But we would just have it all on at once, wouldn't we? And then we would ride the dimmer.
Just ride the dimmer. It was super low tech. Super low tech. Yeah, I would bet we didn't even use a full universe of data on this entire job.
No.
Well, when we finally headed back into London, back to the House of Woodcock, really where the majority of the work was happening, and this is the exterior of the place before we showed up and started raising hell. This is a scene, a frame grab from the film, but this was shot in Fitzroy Square in central London, and the amount of negotiation that had to happen with the location departments, and hats off to locations, because even though they frustrated everybody at times, and I'm sure they were frustrated with us. The diplomacy was like UN level diplomacy to get access to anything in the center part of that garden. And so this house had a lot of challenges. There are a tremendous amount of restrictions. I've heard the word in the Scout of an entity called Historic England. And once you hear that name, that means you're going to have a lot of trouble. So, Jonny can probably speak a lot better to this, but this is I think it was a grade 1 listed house or something like that, which basically means you couldn't do shit to it.
Yeah, it was a nightmare. But also, not only that, is that whoever the owner was previous had essentially gutted the whole place.
Yes.
Pulled out every single cable, all the heating, all the water was gone. So it's just this empty carcass in a grade 1 listed house, where in England, if you do anything, you have to get someone in to check what you're doing, and you have to do method statements and reports on any little item that you're doing.
Cancel.
On top of this location, where they're limited to the amount of days that they can film a year, I think there was like 30 days a year they could film. It was an incredible nightmare.
So normally, so just to talk about this building, it was, I think, what was it, 5 stories?
Yeah,
there's 5 stories to it. There's no elevator, so we're inside the thing, and we're shooting on every floor. Normally, you'd have the ability to put lifts or something outside. That was not allowed. What we were given was 5 feet, and that's what we could do. And so this this pipe and truss rig with these different platforms, that's how we had to light for what was we were probably in there for, I don't know, 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And we also had the restrictions of having to be able to start at 8 in the morning and done at 8 at night. That's it. Game over. No extensions, no nothing. Don't come in early. You film people can stay away. And so this really came out of the gate with a bunch of challenges. And the windows, which in the main room are, they're probably, I don't know, 12 feet high. I mean, they were very, very long windows that you get this beautiful view of the park. And so we did some preliminary testing, and we were looking at like light mats and things out there. We were looking at long linear sources. And Jonny, you had that idea of just taking sky panels and building these rows of them, which were on a truss, so we could move them around and push light into the room, but still be able to look outside. And because we obviously needed to be LED as much as possible, because we need to be able to adjust the intensity, or and just monitor what's going on with the exterior. Because it was this place south facing? Because I know we were
I believe it was, yeah.
Yeah. So every now and then the sun would pop out, and then you'd have to deal with that. And it's not like you could hang flags or anything. There was nothing out there. You couldn't, normally you'd have like some fly swatters or stuff out there. That was just not an option. And so we had several of these. I think we had 4 of these kind of.
Well, I think there's 2 per window. So I think in total there were 6.
Yeah, 6. And then we had those M18s up there also, just for the ability if we needed to have something to push a little.
Yeah, M18s, and I think there was some 2.5s up there as well. Quite steep.
Yeah. And so it was. This is at night.
Oh yeah, so that was us trying to cut out the sun on that previous picture just by.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Getting our rigger to climb up and basically put ultra bounce in between every window.
Nightmare.
It was a complete nightmare.
It was just like anything you did out there would just take forever. So, and then and anytime we had anybody out there, you had to put the safety rail up, which you'd see in the picture. So if it's like, hey, let's just flip around and get the shot, and then there's a rail in there, and then it's like you got to get the guy out and pull the rail down, so nobody go out there. It is just very, very frustrating, And then inside, we basically had the overhead ambient top light, which was light tile, because there were so many restrictions on what we could put into the walls, and then light mats over the each window. And there was something we had run the electrical so we could run 220 and 12 volt. Right? Yeah. Some little idea, which of course backfired every now and then, or we did once. It was something up, but it happens, I
mean, it's again that whole process of it's the same on any film. Is just trying to figure out the quickest way you could shoot anything. And in this way, it was like we would have something above the windows. It would either be a lamp or an LED. So let's just be ready for that case. So it was just a switchable power. But that was also the sort of the beauty of this house. Like going into it is that being an empty carcass, we had to rewire the whole house. So we rewired it to our own lighting desk. Yeah.
So down in the basement was the console programmer. He was down there in a Grand MA, and then throughout the whole place were just wires everywhere, and stuff hidden in the closet. Oh, this was a shot of that. This was the barfly that we had several of these that we used. We just gutted and put LED in just so we'd have the ability to have the control. But yeah, I mean, this is what the place looked like when we first got it. It was just very, very rough with floorboards and things like this. Nothing to it. And this is Paul and Adam, the first AD, just kind of working out some shots and things like that, and figuring out some overall game plans. And in this environment, it was a lot. We definitely used smoke. Every chandelier was on its own dimmer, so we could adjust intensity accordingly. And and obviously with Paul, you got to be ready for camera being low, and looking up. So you don't necessarily always have a lot, like what you said earlier, Erik. You don't have a lot of room overhead. Trying to find the shot and all the great. You always get good photos like this, but a lot of the work we had was in the breakfast area, and again, we didn't have a lot of control outside some of these windows, and so lighting wise, we ended up just pushing as much soft light in from outside as we could, and then augmenting inside by extending it. And again, trying to have as much light control on the light as possible. So snap grids or something like that, so that we could keep it from leaking all over the place, because there really wasn't that much room for flags.
And Mike, that's another room that I think after testing was repainted at least once, if not twice, in terms of the wall color.
Yeah, because this is originally what it looked like.
That's right.
And then here's where they're trying to, looking at some different tones, and then it ended up, and so then we ended up with this here. So they went with the wallpaper instead, which was actually worked out great, because what was great about the wallpaper, it has a lot of reflectivity into it, but it was still broken up with a pattern. So in the film, especially in this scene where we're doing close-ups on her, there's all this soft light coming in, so you do get some separation with some nice highlights behind her, but it's not like really blazing hot. And so a lot of it was just putting negative and white around the room and seeing what works, and just kind of shaping.
And we're using the LED source 4s as well, which were great for just putting into a corner and dialing in the color temperature.
That's right. Getting some of the texture of the wall and stuff like that, bouncing it off of it. That's right. Yeah. It was Leslie Manville, total class act.
The best.
This this room actually worked out quite well for us, given the amount of work we did in there, because we were in there several times over the course of our time here. A lot of great scenes, and
yeah, I guess it's kind of once you're in this situation, especially that room with the table in it, it's such a small working environment that you just have to know what you're doing and figure out exactly what you're doing. And I think the amount of time we shot in there, we got really good at knowing where was best to shoot and where the light was best and how we would figure stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And
I mean, there's also that process of the testing as well. Is obviously Paul changed the colors of that room so many times, but he obviously knew what he was doing. He knew the color ranges and he knew the separation between the actors, and it's just such an important process to do, is to figure out your color scheme.
Yeah, and Mark Tilsley was always like, okay, well, let's try this. He seemed, at least on surface, he was like, yeah, this is cool. Let's figure it out. Yeah, this is, oh yeah, there you go. That's the creative food right there on the table. Saw that, outside the windows, we were just trying, we basically had to rope everything in that we needed, anything coming outside the window. So we were hanging these boxes and things like that and wrapping them because it was raining. Because a lot of these other properties around we had no access to. The hospitality, the welcome mat grew very thin quite quickly. Yeah. But certainly, again, things like, it was really about positioning stuff in the right place, but it wasn't like we were trying to do, all right, let's bring a bunch of, like you said, Jonny, space was very tight. And the other thing was, since this was a practical location, it wasn't like the entire company had to fit into this house. So if we were shooting on floor 1 or floor 2, everything was on the floor above and the floor below. And then, we're going to go up to floor 4 and shoot later. Okay. So then everybody had to climb to carry everything down the same stairway we shot in, bring it all downstairs. And so it was like every day was like you're constantly juggling where equipment was or where it was moving around or things like that. And this is a scene early in the movie where with the Countess, where they're presenting a dress to her and they're having a conversation. And again, it was like, having the practicals was critical. So you had some way of building some contrast in there and something that we could dim or set to taste and all that kind of thing. And then just soft, low level, stop under, ambient backlight, that kind of motivated off of it. This scene here, I mean, there was no ND on those windows. So this was about adjusting exposure so we could see out the windows as much as possible and really being able to push those sky panels and that we had coming outside the window and pushing them in. And one of the things that we had done in our tests, I remember, was working with the set designer, or I'm sorry, the set dresser about Veronique, I think her name was, with what, how white did we want the curtains to be? Because we're going to be pushing light through it. And I think she was like looking at like white, and then we were looking at like champagne, and then we were looking at some sort of gray thing, because we were going to be pushing a lot of light through there, and moving it around. So it was really like this shot here. She's keyed from those sky panels outside, but you still need to be able to, as the shot works, the camera's swinging through the entire thing. So you have to make sure you can have every angle clear.
And it was tricky because the weather changed all the time, the light changed all the time. So exactly. even though Adam Sumner, first AD extraordinaire, we could all sort of schedule accordingly to when we wanted to be in those certain rooms, Mother Nature didn't always cooperate. And then to add insult to injury, about the time we got going in the Fitzroy Square house, the neighbors across the square, straight out those windows, decided to start their renovation project, and scaffolding went up the entire facade. So we were constantly fighting that and hoping that the leaves on the trees would cover it. And I mean, it's just production logistics. It doesn't matter how well you try to plan. There were just obstacles always.
No, and I do think they did have to do some VFX cleanup, very small, on just removing something over there. So this is a scene coming up to where they're making the wedding dress for the princess, and this this dress and Reynolds falls into it and they have to repair it and all this kind of stuff. But this, this scene was, again, we were trying to manage that exterior exposure, setting levels, getting stuff very fluid.
And it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about not restricting the actors and having all those lamps rigged up in the ceiling so that we could basically adapt to whatever was going to happen. So every room was like that.
Yeah. And I remember, because this was handheld, starting with him coming down the stairs, not feeling well. And then it goes into him, falling into the dress and all this. And hey, Jay, could you play the clip six?
Covered a lot of real estate.
Yes. Yeah. And so it was all about having, like you were saying, Johnny, thank God the ceilings in that place were high. So we could hang everything out. And there's Erik and Colin just kind of talking about what that thing is, because this was a complicated shot for Colin.
Yeah.
And and then and they made this dress in 4 days. It's a shout out to the wardrobe department and the team Mark had, because that team could sew. It was impressive, and that dress came together in 4 days. So yeah. It's so then again we had this we really worked as much of the overhead light as we could, because it was just the only way to really allow this is the part where they're sewing and they're doing repair, and the camera is going to dolly all the way around it. You can see the track there for it. And so it's really, you needed to have sources that were ready to go. We looked at let's turn off the sconces and just have a more top light kind of contrasty type of situation. And then we just bring in stuff on the ground if we needed it, and the times we could do that, just to push some more ambient into the room or things like that, like window motivation. There's the illustrious camera department.
And Mike, Johnny, I remember, refresh my memory, but I know with those big units in the ceiling that were up there were times that you had to reposition them or move them. I mean, it wasn't like we just had lights all over the ceiling. You could just turn something on or crossfade or something. I do remember times that the big ladders had to come in and you had to completely revamp something or change the angle or something, if I remember right.
No, absolutely. When you see Paul doing this, you come in and he's doing that. Okay, now your game plan is going to change real quick.
Right.
He'd be like, I really think it works down really great down here. And like, all right, cool. Well, that's
okay. We got to take that light out of the ceiling.
Yeah. Okay. We know what this day is going to be like. Let's go. There's a scene in the film where he comes into Cyril's office and is, basically lamenting bringing Alma into the House of Woodcock. And it was an interesting challenge because we had to really beef the stop up for the reverse on Cyril because of that window and to hold that window. And so, normally this was a case where the HMIs were out the window and we had to keep the camera. I think it was keeping the camera just low enough because they couldn't lock it up out there. So people are like walking by and, telling them to fuck off and everything else and just keep going. They didn't care. And so, the benefit of shooting in central London, and so we had to beef up. I think we had a couple of 4K powers in there or something, just something we could throw a lot of light just because we couldn't really put ND on that window because of the light. Again, the light was changing so much.
There were a few times where we put we used double nets like directly outside the window to try and kill it a bit, but again, it's just like trying to that angle, especially, is like it was impossible to because we couldn't go into next door neighbors, so it was very tough to control that sort of thing.
It was a fabulous location, but it came at a steep price. I mean, not just literally, but figuratively as well.
Took a year off all our
a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Funny now. Look, we're all smiling now looking at this. There wasn't much smiles at the time.
Time heals all wounds.
Yeah, that's right.
Poor Leslie in this room. It was so hot.
Oh yeah, she's a pro.
Yeah.
Asparagus dinner. This was most of the show we were single camera, but this was one of the few scenes we were not single camera. We were two cameras.
Yeah. the two big dinner scenes, one of which didn't make the final cut, where
Yes,
we actually used two cameras.
that's true. I got images. This scene was, this was seen again. The wallpaper helpful, very helpful. Candlelit type of thing. This was one of the things that Paul had referenced early, and when we were talking about stuff, was the Barry Lyndon type of thing, trying to see how much we can do with candles, things like that. And there's an example later that we have, but this scene was, I know he was trying to. This is where he was trying to get 2,000-foot mags, right? He wanted to do like
right,
and they couldn't. I don't know. Was it Kodak needed more lead time to get the film in 2,000?
More lead time for the film, yes. Panavision has the 2,000-foot mags, which were resurrected for Paul for Magnolia, for scenes in Magnolia, and so the magazine wasn't the issue, but the stock was the issue, because we needed a little more time.
So I mean, normally on film, how long your take is driven by your magazine time. So if you have a 400-foot magazine, which is smaller, obviously it's 400 feet. That's about 4.5 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah. 90 feet a minute at 24 frames per second. So, you just round off, 1,000-foot mags, roughly 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Run time.
Yeah. So he was trying to see if we could get 2,000-foot mags so they could just keep going on this thing, but that wasn't. That didn't happen. So it was just two cameras jammed in. And the other thing with Paul is you don't have stand-ins. So I have just so many pictures of Jonny or Adam or whoever just happened to be there sitting in, I mean, it could be the best boy. It was whoever was in there was going to be the stand-in, because you just had to have something, even though the height is different, the face is different, the hair is different. That's an interesting challenge, And many times I had Adam as the stand-in for Alma, which is a real radical shift. So we basically lit this with a couple light mats and a paper lantern that I don't know what bulb it had in there, and just kind of.
Was that one with the LED ribbon? I think we had an LED ribbon inside the trailer.
Oh, that might have been in there. You're right.
But then we had we used a lot of muslin, and then also the black bobbinet, which we nicked from the atelier, that we just kept putting on everything to try and kill it.
That's right. We'd see anything good on all these sets, you just grab it. It becomes part of the lighting package.
Yeah. But going back to your point about the wallpaper, I think it's such an important tool is to use like the reflectance of stuff.
Yes.
And using that, like just getting the right angle for that wallpaper lights up that whole wall. You don't necessarily have to light the wall itself, but having a lamp off screen will just pick up that wall, and it just like having that tool and knowing about it is just such an important thing.
Yeah, a little goes a long way.
Yeah.
Here you go. I see, again, practical location. Everybody jammed into the corners, and very, very, very tight set.
That was the funniest thing as well. Is that wherever there wasn't a camera, we would try and put something else. So we'd have diffusions or whites just to try and soften everything.
You'd walk in there, and it was like every set was like getting into a maze. There's a jolly moment at some point. I don't know. This is some of the night interior up on the top floor. So then everybody has to move upstairs, move all the stuff that's stored upstairs, move it all downstairs. It was constantly moving. Any square footage you could find, you were, you were trying to hide gear or light or hide camera. Yeah, this is the scene. This is the fuck off scene where she comes in and she says, I think it was telling you to fuck off.
Yep.
No, I mean, it was this set, we got a lot of mileage out of this house. We'll say that. Like, this is a lot of time to see outside the windows. It was just like stuff hanging there, roped from the floor above out the window, because you had no ability to put a stand on any other property. It was everything we could do within the confines of what we had. And so, a lot of adjusting the drapes, a lot of hiding things behind curtains, a lot, just trying to hide edges and small sources as much as we could do. This is the scene at the beginning where he's getting ready. And again, this is in the top floor, and we had a little bit of a deck out front there. I think we ended up pushing some HMI and stuff through it. And, these are some stills from it, but it's like, again, just kind of extending the daylight inside of the building, inside of the space.
Yep.
And there's Colin there.
And you can see Paul does operate a lot, especially, especially he's the first to say I'm not a camera operator. And and that's why Colin's there, because he's one of the best in the world. But a lot of times Paul watches through camera, especially if there's no operating involved or it's very simple stuff, because he really wants to watch performance through lens. So he does operate a lot. And Mike, I know somebody had asked a question about examples of the 50 Pathé, and unfortunately we can't really show anything because of copyright reasons. We can't really show an actual clip from the movie, and I've been trying to search here on my computer for some references, so I could tell somebody, well, it's such and such a shot in the movie, and I don't have like copies of the camera reports on my computer, sadly, because I'm trying to, that Paul's used that lens in many things, like There Will Be Blood. There's shots of Daniel Day-Lewis, some close-ups, and I just
have that thing, a hard time. Vice on the master.
An Inherent Vice, but I just wish I could say, or at least have an example, and sadly I don't. And I will say quickly, somebody had asked in one of the questions about the hardest shot pulling focus on, and everything with Paul is difficult because, as what's the terminology? We're usually shooting a freeform jazz odyssey in front of a festival crowd. Odyssey.
That's right. That's our Spinal Tap reference. We use that. Yes. Spinal Tap is used a lot in his films.
Because there's just a lot of organic freeform, filmmaking with Paul. So you don't really have marks. I mean, actors don't have marks. You don't have focus marks. I mean, you really go with the flow. So a lot of things are difficult with Paul. But I would just say, like, for me personally, I think the hardest shot was at the end of the movie. We were shooting the Barbara Rose wedding reception scene, I think. And then at the very end of the day, we had to run across the street to the park to do Alma and Reynolds walking with the baby carriage, the end of the movie thing. And we, in typical film fashion, were way late getting out there. We had almost lost all the available light, and it was beautiful. But it was like a one-time crack at the shot. And somebody else had set it up so that we, had laid the dolly tracking, and we had the second camera backup body up there. So I ran out there at dusk. I didn't have any tools. I mean, there was no remote focus. Push two stops, 2000 ASA. There's no light left. Right. We put on the longest prime lens we had. It's wide open. I've got no focus marks. There's no light ranger. There's no cine tape. There's no nothing. And we just shot. And I had no marks. I didn't know where they were walking. I mean, it was an absolute crapshoot. And I did lose sleep. I did lose sleep that night. That was old school, like back in the day when you didn't know what the next day's dailies were. And I really thought that I probably didn't have that shot in its entirety. And so without a doubt, that was like one of the hardest moments. But
I was going to say that just to speak to that, Erik, because one of the things I forgot to mention, when we were outside of London, it sometimes would take us 3 to 4 days before we would see dailies. So we would photograph something, and we wouldn't see it for 3 or 4 days to really see what the final result was, because we'd have to go back on a train, get processed, come back up. And he was also, Paul's also very particular about lab, and so he would also take rolls of film. We would shoot a shot. We might shoot 2 different rolls of it, and the other roll would get sent to photochem in LA. Well, there's another 5-6 days before you're going to see the damn thing. And so you really have to sit with God, I hope we got that right. And then you're not going to know for a few more days, and then you're already out of the location. So yeah.
And that was true for all of us. That wasn't just pressure on me. That was pressure on you. That was pressure on everyone, because and sometimes even when we did get it right, then Paul wouldn't be happy with it for other reasons, maybe performance or something. So it was nerve-wracking on that level. But that shot in particular, I'll never forget, because I just thought, I'll be the first to admit, sometimes you're lucky. The old adage of I'd rather be lucky than good. I got lucky, and it's in the movie.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things, because I want to speak about in the House of Woodcock, the chandeliers, one of the things we had to do was be able to set levels on these things and dim them way down if we needed to, because as our light level would change, we needed to be able to maintain the same kind of ratios or something of the exterior. So it quickly became apparent. I remember Johnny was talking about that. We couldn't just put regular incandescent bulbs in there because as we dim them way down, they would go very, very warm. So hats off, as crazy as he could be at times, Julian Fixtures or Joe or whoever it was, did this little wonder. And this is an impressive piece of work. And I show this to all the fixtures people here in LA at times too, which is like basically taking the bulbs and putting LEDs on them. Okay, cool. Anybody can do that. And then soldering them all together, but then tapping into the base so we can pull the power out of the actual socket so we don't have additional cables running down it. And so, yeah, you ended up with something that we could dim way, way down to like 1% and still maintain the same color. But that allowed us to shoot an extra 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. So we could get stuff where if we needed the exterior to be brighter, this is an example when we didn't, we were going for color contrast here, but you know, outside is like maybe you're at the bottom end of the whole thing. And so these kind of little things that we had, that versatility, were really critical for us to getting an extra shot in the day, because they were hard out at 8 o'clock. The party was over at 8. And, you know, and the few times that we did shots like this where we were looking into the square, oh my God, we had to tell them exactly where the lights were going, no changes. They were like crazy hard asses out there. And I think there were only a couple of shots at night where we saw out there. We only really shot outside the building a few times. So yeah, it was.
Well, there were even times, I remember there were times out there where we would suddenly change direction and we didn't have a light allocation for like the opposite way. So we would turn all of the sky panels around on the house and just
that's right.
That's all around and just light the whole thing with the sky panels on the house.
Yeah, exactly. Just flip it out and front light it, because it's like that's all we do. There was no other option.
But those candelabra LED bulbs that they made were truly works of art. I mean, that was amazing.
Well, the good thing about them as well is obviously being in that house is that we weren't actually really allowed to go into the walls with cables, and those lights didn't exist there originally. So we could use a tiny 12-volt cable and just make a tiny indent in the wall and cover it up without having to damage the walls.
Yeah, just basically scoring into the wall, not cutting through it, but just and then Mark would come through and have his team paint over it and make it look solid. But yeah, none of that was there. That's correct. That's right.
Yeah. And elaborating on your heart out on that house every night at 8 p.m. Ties into the infamous mother scene, as Daniel Lewis is doing one of the most emotional scenes of the movie, which didn't necessarily play that way in the final cut, but as we were shooting it, super Daniel at his utmost on the acting level, and it is 7:59 in the evening, and they are the shut you down people are at the door coming up the stairs like, why are you still shooting? And I just remember thinking, wow, maybe this will be the time I get to see Daniel like, you know, lose it or something. I mean, it was just one of those classic moments. You hear the footsteps coming up the stairs, you know they're coming to say you have to stop shooting. Daniel's in the middle of this, you know, reminiscing his mother in the photo. It was classic.
No, I mean, it was like, this is the emotional, you know, one of the emotional high points for his character in the film. And it's at the end of the day. We usually would stop maybe about 10 minutes before 8 o'clock. So we had time to shut everything off and get it all ready and then get out of there. And this one, we're at the top we're in the top floor of the building. So we're shooting this scene and it's literally like the storming of the gates. They're coming upstairs to shut us down. And so everyone's shutting off everything in every floor below, closing doors, all this kind of stuff. He's up there.
As if we're rapping, you know, as if the person's rapping while the three of us are in a room trying to squeeze out this last scene.
That's right. And he's, you know, it's just an emotional moment where he's seeing his mom in a fever dream vision and all this stuff. And, you know, so I'm holding the flag. You guys are on the camera. You and Paul are on the camera. You know, Johnny's holding the Medusa. So this is 3-time Academy Award winning actor Daniel Day-Lewis, and he's being lit with this thing.
A true high point.
So we call that thing the Medusa, and I remember when that came from the Bloody Cuts era, right? Is that right? Where did you get that?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it came from one of my old horror movies. Yeah. I remember I'd sat at a table and made that with my dad and my granddad, I think. But it was quite cool because we found Roscoe used to do this lacquer that you used to color bulbs with. It's the only way you could use color bulbs. And I think it had gone they'd stopped making it, and we had to find like these warms and oranges. But what was great, but not so much on the action front, is that because the lights are so hot, it would burn off and create this really nice warm coloured light on the bulb.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that's basically what we used for her. It worked. It was, God, if I just remember them coming up and they're coming out the door, and I don't know, Adam had some sort of interference thing going on, so it slowed him down at least the floor.
I think I've sent all my sparks home as well. All the electricians have gone home.
That's right. Everybody, yeah, that's right. We were sending people out the door. It was like, oh no, we're done.
We're wrapped.
The generator was shut off. That's why we're using this thing, because we were plugged into house power. And then it was great. It got the shot. We get out of there. Next morning, Daniel, his utmost professionalism, Reynolds comes in. He's like, Paul and Adam, could I speak to you a second? Door closes. He, bam, verbally just, I was like, whoa, he's pissed. Okay. He
remember there was another one of those moments when we were up in Yorkshire and we all jumped on the train. And again, it was just like everyone had to go home, and it was like me, Mike, Erik, Colin, Paul, and I think like 2 of my electricians. We weren't allowed anyone else, and it was just like we were just driving on that train. Like, I don't know where it is even going. We were just on it. We were shooting what we could.
We're just getting the hell out. Yeah.
I remember I was giving you, Erik, I was giving you new rolls of film to reload the camera. Then I was taking your film away, putting it in the boxes.
Yeah. No, this, I have that as one of our, one of the scenes that didn't make the cut. This one here, I was gonna say so I mean, the House of Woodcock had tons of different stuff going on. It had this dress, fashion show, which we do inside here. This was a big moment. Could you play clip 8, Jake? This one, I think we probably got a little crazy on the smoke, but
the motivation, if you remember, was that 90% of the background was smoking. I mean, it was period. It was 50s. I mean, it was intentional, but I think we used the motivation that half of the, or 2/3 of the people were physically actually smoking, that we really pumped it in. And it was a very drafty place, so it did dissipate quickly.
Yeah. It was good. And so, again, mostly the same type of lighting. We actually let some hard light in and stuff that had happened. There was some natural hard light coming in, and we kind of augmented that a bit at times. The way it plays in the cut, though, he's looking at her through a little peephole and things like this. And it was, I mean, the practical location, again, there was probably 50 extras or so. And, I mean, this is some of the frame grabs from it, some stills. They made up these nice invitations that I took a picture of, prop department had a lot of great stuff there. Again, top ambience, light through the windows, and a lot of atmosphere. One-stop push, a lot of different things to kind of get a lot of texture in this frame.
And also that smoke, it helped. I know there's a lot in there, but it does help carry the light through the rooms. And absolutely. I mean, we were shooting such a wide area in that house with no lights on the floor. Exactly. So that smoke just helps carry the light all the way through.
Absolutely. And this house was also very drafty, so it was constantly after every take, all right, let's redo it. Let's set the base again, all this kind of stuff. There's a scene with a character named Barbara Rose where he's making a dress for her, which is pretty funny. Again, we were playing this where we were playing a warm area where they were working and then cooler in the background. And really a lot going on, and then they have a press conference afterwards. So we kind of had to have there's a whole great subplot that we had shot for this that didn't make the final cut. And then they go and they try and break in and get the dress. And this was at, I think it was, I can't remember what hotel this was at. We shot in London. This was all in London. But again, just basically keeping it a lot of top light, a lot of reflectivity. Mark's dress, this is the material of it, had great reflections in it. So we kind of worked that as much as we could. Certainly really the character of Barbara Rose is great, and the actress who played it was really fantastic. There was this dinner party we did, which is kind of based off of what we were talking earlier. It was kind of one of his inspirations for Barry Lyndon, and so we ended up doing this with as many candles as we could, and just augmenting with little bits of LED on the tables and things like that. Really, again, this was, I'm sure we were probably shooting on I don't know, we were shooting the Primos in this, and Erik, I can't remember, but I remember us trying to motivate as much with candles as possible, like putting groups of candles all over the place to hide them and stuff like that off frame. Yeah.
This is one of those locations again where we just couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like we wanted to rig something above the table just to help augment those candles, but there was just nothing we could do. So
yeah,
it was just like add more candles and then just boom in lights where we could.
Exactly. Can we hide something here, Colin? Can we just move this piece of silver so we could hide another little piece of LED or something?
Yeah. And we did mix. I mean, we didn't use the Primos that often, just because it's a newer, sharper lens than the Hero Glass. But Paul, sometimes we would do a scene like this, and because of the way the candle flames were behaving, or there was a reason that Paul would want it a little cleaner for a moment, and maybe it was one angle, one shot, maybe it was just the wide shot, the master of the scene, and then often we would get off those Primos and get back into the hero lenses, so to speak. So definitely mixed it up. But Paul was very sensitive. He's very savvy and sensitive to that. So he would often just say, listen, I want to do this particular shot with this particular lens. But then as soon as we go to this, I want to switch to, there was a method to the madness.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is motivated, like in this restaurant, right. This is an interesting one too, where it's like, we keep coming back to this on many different scenes. And this is a place called Wild Honey in London. And again, tremendous amount of restrictions. Old panel wood, what we could attach to, what we couldn't attach to. That mirror is fixed. That was going nowhere. So we had to deal with that thing. It was not, you weren't able to adjust it at all. Of course we're in the corner. So it's like you're limited by what we can do. This is, there you are, Jonny. It's a mix of, this image could almost qualify for shitty rigs. Almost, not quite.
But that was one of those processes. Obviously, if we were shooting somewhere else and then we were going ahead, our rigging guy James Summers was rigging it ahead of us, and we just didn't have enough light mats to give him to do what we wanted. So we started using reefers and some older Fresnel heads that we were sort of had to augment off the rig above.
That's right. We were banging, we were bouncing those into the table and just getting that low light and stuff like that. And fortunately, we were blessed with the practical in the corner, so there was something at least that we had as a highlight. But yeah, it was, and everything.
We managed to keep almost everything out of that mirror throughout that entire scene.
Yeah.
I think the only shot that had to have some mirror cleanup is the opening shot when it brings Reynolds Woodcock in through the front door and then takes him to the table. And we tried many, many ways to do that dolly shot and keep the camera out of the mirror. And I think ultimately we just couldn't. And that's one of the very few shots that had a little cleanup work done on it in the end.
What do you say about that, Jonny? That's a helping hand there, making sure we can get it done.
Yeah, I'm just helping out, be another ladder for him.
Yes, exactly.
But again, is the depth in that like we were using the depth in the mirror by using those lamps that we'd put in further back in the restaurant, which we used LED in those globes. We had rolls of LED in each one. And it's good to have that depth because otherwise you're just shooting into a corner.
Exactly. And what was interesting too is I remember we did the one scene where she was where they had just gotten married and it was kind of like the reception afterwards. It was supposed to be a night scene and it was just like, screw it, let's make it day, because there was some reason that we weren't able to we would have just seen solids in the background. So we just kind of embraced what was going on, and it really works out. It's like, it's just a different feel for the restaurant, which was just kind of it evolved that way. We did get a lot of mileage out of this place. There you are, Erik.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, there's a happy camera crew, sort of happy. It's Jeff Kunkel, Colin, Adam, Paul. Yeah, and then this next location is a favorite for all of us. You know, Johnny's very familiar with this part of England, but an area called Blackpool. He's got some property up there apparently. This is on the west side of the country, but it has this area called the Blackpool Tower, and has this very famous ballroom in there. And we had looked at, like, we needed this. This is based off the I think it's the Chelsea Arts Ball.
New Year's Eve, yeah.
New Year's Eve, which they would usually
Eve.
do. They'd usually do at the Royal Albert Hall. Well, we did go and look at the Royal Albert Hall, but there was just no way we could have pulled that off, and just availability and all this kind of stuff. So the Blackpool Ballroom ended up substituting. So we all went up there, and Mark was really, he really, took the brakes off as far as just really coming up with some crazy stuff here, him and his team, because this is like, they have all these floats that they had to build. There's balloons. It's a full on celebration. And so we went up there and we did a full rehearsal day of that space, which is actually quite helpful because we were able to pre-light as much as possible. And it wasn't like it was a ton of lighting. It was just a big space. I mean, we ended up augmenting and putting I think source fours and par cans up there. And then we had our 4 follow spots with folks in the follow spots. And but I mean, there was a lot of extras, a lot of activity, and full balloon. They had this hanging overhead, so we had a couple of our own balloons, lighting balloons, and then there's like each of those rows of balloons, I think, was 1,000, and they could pop groups of 500 or something like that. And then this had to come down when they had to reload the damn thing. So it was like, it was that was a challenge. It's just, again, why not?
And also on that location as well is one of those times on the recce's where we turned up and we looked at all of the bulbs, and every single bulb in the place was this horrible green LED bulb.
That's right.
And then we had to test again, didn't we? We had to go test with your camera just to check to see if we could even shoot with those bulbs.
If it wouldn't flicker. That's right.
Yeah, which obviously they did flicker. And then we had to basically change every single bulb in the place. I think there were thousands. Like it were all chandeliers and the lights that are around.
Yeah. It all had to go back to incandescent, because low wattage incandescent, because the LED bulbs they had in the place on camera were flickering. And but just the amount of costumes and all this kind of stuff. There's this rocket ship. I mean, it was a full thing. Could Jay, could you play clip 9? This is the Blackpool Mayhem, and there's a full band on the stage. We were lighting the backing with some sky panels and stuff. We had par cans up there, and it was
another one of the times, one of the very few times where we used a second camera as well.
Yeah.
Was here.
Yeah. And I have video from when we did the original scout, and he walked the shot, and then it's interesting to see what he had done and then see the actual shot. And they're very similar. I mean, he modified his a little bit, the final work a little bit. And I think he did use, it was going to be an all-in-one, and there is a cut in there, maybe 2 cuts in the shot, but there's some, it was a really just great, chaotic, just complete mayhem environment, which apparently is what this party was back in the day in the 50s. And,
I think they used to, in the real event, they used to hire rugby players, and the rugby players would all come on and basically get into fights with each other, and it would just turn into this huge brawl within the dance floor.
Yeah, trashing all the it's just the complete.
And it was interesting because the main shot that takes Reynolds Woodcock's character through the mayhem, through the floats, because he's going to grab Alma and drag her out of there. He pulls her over to the side and has a confrontation with her. But the main it's a handheld shot. It was also one of the few times we used a zoom lens. I think we had the little lightweight Panavision lightweight zoom, like 17.5 to 34 or something, and it was just for flexibility, because and also partly for the look, but we did, I don't know what, 8 or 10 takes, and each time, so the basic outline of the shot never changed, where we picked him up coming down the stairs and where we took him through the floor. But of course the reset is so epic on the thing that you never had the exact same thing in frame each take.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we stay with him. So the one time, one of the background, I think it's the take that's in the movie, one of the background players starts to lunge or something towards Daniel Day-Lewis, and he reacts like he's going to punch him or something, and things that really, really kept calling on his toes, you know, because he's handheld following him through, and it was just mayhem. So it's interesting because every take was different, and just, you know, what you had to react to. So.
Yeah, no, totally. And you know, we ended up just doing this little bit of augmentation, just, you know, I think those were Kinos. I think they were.
Yeah. Yeah, they were.
You know, just taping stuff up just to get a little something. But there were, again, like you said, Eric, we were seeing everything. And so the fortunate thing was we had tons of extras dressed in anything. So you could just shove them up against, you know, oh, well, here, could you throw somebody standing there in the background to block that light? It was like no big deal. Yeah, sure. It's chaotic. You know, just yet another unusual day. And then I remember we got done and they're clearing extras out. And I don't know exactly how the shot came together. I just remember Paul was kind of like looking at it and he was like, hey, let's just have them dance out there or something, like post, you know, party's over. They're just hanging out. And this ended up being a nice little moment in the film where we're just like, you know, I think it was just the spotlight on them and you know, just the place is trashed. They're having their moment, you know.
That was great. That was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, because we shot this in like, I don't know, maybe a half hour. Because I think they had to let all the extras go and get them out of there. It's just the overtime. Right. You know. Somebody was asking also about the photo shoot set, which was, you know, another location that we had where it was just like where they're shooting some of the dresses. You know, this was, I can't remember what this location was, someplace in London. But, you know, just full glam work. We built a big wall of bounce, kind of Janusz Kaminski style, I think, on the left there, just so she had a nice, beautiful, soft light. And, you know, of course, Mark Bridges and his fantastic costumes. And then all this stuff we did, all this still shooting stuff was, I think we modified. We used some of these actually, just like the old tungsten heads. I think a few we modified for something.
Yeah, we just they're old 5K and 10K heads, but we put our own newer bulbs in so that we could actually control them. Yeah. And then we were pretty much using those. We were using hard light on them.
Yeah, we did.
Like Alma's skin took it like really nicely.
Yeah.
And then we just, to fill the room, I think we had a couple of spherical 5K balloons that we were just filling out the shadows. But a lot of it was just those hard old school tungsten lamps. Yeah,
and then he had he dressed up a still photographer so it could be taking stills at the same time, but had her be part of the, you know, I mean, it was actually a real photographer who was taking the photos, but then we were, you know, obviously shooting them, taking the pictures and all that kind of stuff. So he was getting the images that he wanted to use later. Well, here's everyone's favorite section. What didn't make the cut?
That's a whole movie in and of itself.
Trip down memory lane. You know, I was just grabbing some images that I don't even know what they were, but stuff we shot that didn't make it. But it was all very good work, and just to applaud people's efforts. You know, a lot of different scenes, a lot of different directions. And this is the thing, you know, look, filmmaking is a very organic process, and you know, there's directions that stuff we shoot that just doesn't work for the story. I remember we shot all these scenes, and then I saw the cut. I saw one cut, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. You know, we were kind of like, all right, this is interesting. And then I came back like 2 months later and saw another cut, and I'm like, hey, what happened to that scene? And that's it. He goes, you didn't miss it, did you? And I was like, you know, you're right. And it was like, and they were beautiful scenes. I mean, there's some great work in here. Like we did all this cool stuff on a train, and
it's beautiful. Yeah, beautiful.
And it was really beautiful work. And it just, you know,
that was when we rigged that lamp on the outside. We rigged some light lamps on the outside of the train,
hanging on the train, flying down.
And then it went through a tunnel. We was like, oh damn, we didn't know we were going to go through a tunnel at this point. I think we just gone a lot further than we were originally planned to go.
That's right. We had there's a whole other plot point around this image here, which just didn't make the cut. And it's like, he just took the story. He and Dylan took the story down to just the two of them, and you know,
it was interesting, Mike. I think that I was surprised. Well, having done 3 projects with Paul now, so being familiar with his process, I felt that the final cut of Phantom Thread was very, very close to the original script he let me read. After going down many paths, I mean, which is his process, but for any of us that have actually had the pleasure of reading one of Paul's scripts, he's not somebody who everything is spelled out. It's not storyboarded. It's not shot for shot. It's like, this is exactly how we're doing it. It's far more organic, and he explores. So there will be a page in the script that may say, you know, even though it's a very defined written word scene, then all of a sudden you flip the page, it's like possible moment for such and such beat, or, you know, a note, almost like a note to himself, explore, you know, this or that. So there's all this room for, as these characters develop and grow through our shooting process, things are discovered and explored, and Paul will go down those different paths. Doesn't mean in the end he'll stray from the original concept, but he allows the possibility for those things to happen. So it's you know, a lot of these didn't make the cut. We explored, you know, I think Phantom Thread was unique, at least for me, with the projects with Paul, in that these characters took on a life of their own, and what was scripted, they built these relationships. I don't think even Paul knew exactly how the chemistry was going to work between Alma and Reynolds. I mean, he knew because he cast them, but it was like, it was really fascinating, because it was like, is she going to get the better of him? Is he going to get the better of her? I mean, it was just a fascinating discovery that was made on film, and so it's you know, it's a little different than certain, you know, conventional sort of scripts in filmmaking.
Absolutely. I was there was somebody who'd asked a question. I want to make sure we get to it because we're almost over. But somebody asked about the scene where he says, "Kiss me, girl, before I'm sick," and right as he delivers that line, right before the shot cuts, this light glows up from underneath, and that was an interesting thing because we experimented with like this whole big light change happening then, like, and so we had all this stuff rigged, and as soon as he says that line, we hit this cue, and they decided not to use the cue, but I don't think we had a take where we didn't run the cue, and so they just cut. That's why that glow is happening right at the end of that shot, and they just cut right before the light really got crazy. So yeah, it was. But there's a lot of different, like you said, Erik. There's a lot of different passageways that we had shot, or, you know, directions the movie went, and ultimately, I have to say, nothing's precious in that space. It's like, if it doesn't work, get it out of here. And
yeah,
you know, and the same with performance too. It's like like we were saying earlier, reshoot is not a dirty word. It's like they just plan for the ability to go back and, you know what, we can do this better. And here's how we can do it better. And
and the wonderful thing about Paul being an auteur is that, with that concept of reshoot not being a dirty word, Paul knows what he wants and what he needs by and large. And so he is so able to say, you know, listen, I know, you know, all films are governed by budgets and time constraints, and none of this is any different. But Paul is able to say, you know, I want to redo that for whatever the reasons are. But he's able to say, I don't need to do this, something else that was scheduled. Like he because it's his project through and through, he knows what he can get rid of. He knows what he can manipulate. So it's kind of neat, because he can say, you know, listen, I really want to redo this. I'm not happy. I took it in the wrong direction, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he's able to sit down with his producer and his AD and say, you know, I'm not adding a day to the schedule, because I'll only spend an hour doing this scene. You know, he just knows. I mean, it's the beauty of, you know, being in charge of all aspects of it.
Yeah, it is definitely a unique experience. And, you know, we're getting, hopefully post-COVID, we're getting ready to gear up for another one. Here's a shout out to some of our beautiful Spark team who they still smiling, and this is near the end of the show, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, characters one and all.
Yeah,
I mean, they were great, really, because obviously, Mike, you brought over a lot of new technology that we weren't used to yet, and they all adapted very quickly to it. like we weren't using a ton of LED here. We weren't using light mats. We weren't using luminaire, and we kind of just adapted to it. And yeah, I mean, they just did a great job. Like you just tell them where you want the lamps, and they would just rig it all up, and it would all be working. Hand you a laptop, and it would just be great.
Yeah, it was a good team, and it was like really, I think that we were really fortunate that everyone was open-minded about the approach, and because it was just very non-traditional. And yeah, and there's I don't know what that's from, but there's it was a really unique experience. I just want to make sure if there's any other. That's basically all 338 slides.
Amazing.
Just looking if there's any questions that we might have missed. That there is
anybody
certainly
left watching, listening.
Yes, exactly. All right. Yes, exactly. Now here's where Paul's going to come on. All right. Now here's Paul Thomas Anderson. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Anyway, well, I guess I'll just say thank you, everyone, for watching. Yeah. And this was a good journey down the road. A lot of memories in these photos. I'll make sure I send a copy of this to you guys because it's really like, wow.
Yeah.
Takes you back.
Well, kudos to you, Mike, for putting that all together, calling all those.
Yeah.
And to great. Jake behind the scenes. Jake, who's
a shout out to Jake and Phoebe who are
and Phoebe, yes.
Yeah, who are doing this, and Hans and everyone who watched, and thank you so much. And until next time, I think that's it. So thank you all.
Yeah.
Take care. Healthy. Yeah.
Thank you.